The sun hung low over the open fields of rural Ohio, casting a golden hue across the packed rally grounds. Flags waved in the breeze, music played over distant speakers, and families moved shoulder to shoulder with signs and hopeful eyes. Amid the crowd, Barron Trump walked alongside campaign aides, tall and composed, offering polite smiles and small nods to those who reached out. Though he wasn't the focus of the event, whispers followed him, people curious, people watching. A few rows back from the main stage, near a worn-out wooden fence, stood a boy no older than 9. His jacket was 2 sizes too big, sleeves covering his hands, and his baseball cap was clearly secondhand. He didn't wave a sign or chant slogans like the others. He stood quietly, eyes locked on the stage, his fingers nervously twisting the hem of his coat. Volunteers moved past him without much notice, too busy managing the growing crowd. But Barron, just as he turned to step onto the small backstage ramp, caught the boy's stillness in the corner of his eye. Something about him, the way he stood so quietly in a place filled with noise, the way his eyes were fixed with quiet longing, made Barron pause. He leaned over to a staff member and whispered something. Instead of continuing up the steps, Barron turned and began walking toward the fence. The crowd parted slightly, confused but curious. Cameras turned. A low murmur rolled through the rally grounds. The boy didn't seem to notice the sudden shift in attention. He had no idea that, in just seconds, his entire world was about to change. Barron Trump moved with quiet determination, his steps steady as he walked through the crowd. The chatter began to die down as people realized where he was headed. A few lifted their phones to record, but no one dared to interrupt. Barron's eyes remained fixed on the small boy sitting alone on the edge of the rally space, his arms wrapped around his knees like they were the only thing holding him together. The boy noticed Barron approaching and froze. His eyes widened, unsure whether to be nervous, excited, or simply confused. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Barron stopped right in front of him, slowly crouching down to the boy's level. The noise of the rally seemed to fade, leaving just the two of them in their own moment. "Hey," Barron said softly, his voice calm and kind. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated. I'm Eli." Barron smiled gently. "Nice to meet you, Eli. Did you come here with someone?" "My mom," Eli replied, glancing behind him. "She's standing back there. I just didn't want to be in the crowd. It's too loud." Barron nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, I get that. Big crowds can feel pretty overwhelming sometimes. You're brave for being here anyway." Eli looked up at him, still unsure how to respond. But in that moment, something shifted. For the first time that day, he didn't feel invisible. Barron glanced over his shoulder and noticed the crowd had started watching them. Phones were up, but he didn't care. He turned his focus back to Eli, whose small fingers were nervously fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. "You want to walk with me?" Barron asked, offering his hand like they were old friends. There was no pressure in his tone-only sincerity. Eli blinked in surprise. "You want me to come with you?" "Yeah," Barron said simply. "I think this whole thing's more fun when you don't go through it alone." The boy hesitated, then slowly reached out and took Barron's hand. It was a small gesture, but when their hands connected, it sent a ripple through the surrounding crowd. What they were witnessing wasn't politics or publicity. It was human, real, and undeniably moving. As they walked side by side through the crowd, the people around them gently stepped aside. Barron didn't rush. He kept his pace slow, matching Eli's, occasionally glancing down to make sure the boy felt safe. One woman near the front of the crowd whispered, "That's the kindest thing I've ever seen." A man with a veteran's cap gave a respectful nod as they passed. And Eli, he was no longer hugging his knees on the sidelines. Now, he was walking beside the son of one of the most talked about political figures in the country, yet none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was that someone saw him. Someone chose him. They didn't head straight to the stage. Barron led him toward a quieter corner near the side of the venue, where a few chairs were placed behind a low barrier. He helped Eli sit down, then pulled up a chair beside him. "You okay now?" Barron asked gently. Eli nodded, this time with a little more strength behind it. "Thanks," he added, almost in a whisper. "No one's ever done something like this for me before." Barron leaned back in the chair and gave a small smile. "Well, they should have." Eli sat quietly for a moment, his shoulders slowly relaxing for the first time that day. The noise of the crowd still echoed around them, but it was distant, now muffled, behind the comfort of a moment that felt untouched by the chaos. Barron leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, glancing sideways at the boy. "You like music?" he asked casually, as if they were just two kids at school hanging out at lunch. Eli hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Sometimes. When it's quiet, I play my mom's old songs. She used to sing around the house. She said music makes you brave." Barron smiled gently. "She sounds like a smart woman." She was. Eli's voice cracked slightly, but he didn't pull away. "She passed away last year." There was a long pause. Not awkward, just heavy with meaning. Barron didn't fill it with empty words. He didn't need to. Instead, he gave Eli a quiet kind of acknowledgement, a soft glance that said, "I hear you. I see you." "My mom says loss never really leaves you," Barron said after a moment. "It just becomes part of you, like a shadow. Some days, it's behind you. Some days, it's all over everything." Eli looked at him, eyes wide. "You've lost someone?" Barron nodded, slowly, in different ways. "You grow up with a lot of people around, but sometimes it still feels lonely. Not because they don't care, but because they don't always understand." Eli bit his lip. "Yeah, I think that's what hurts the most." The two sat in that understanding silence for a while longer. Around them, the rally continued, cheers, cameras, chants. But in this little corner of the world, none of that mattered. What mattered was that a young boy, who felt invisible all morning, had found someone who didn't just notice him but truly listened. After a few minutes, Barron stood up and turned to Eli. "Come with me. There's someone I want you to meet." "Who?" Eli asked, curiosity flickering in his voice. "You'll see," Barron replied, offering his hand once more. And just like that, with cameras clicking in the background and strangers murmuring in surprise, the tall young man and the quiet boy disappeared into the crowd, one leading, the other following, but both walking with something neither had before: connection. They walked together through the maze of people, past waving flags, bright lights, and the rhythmic hum of distant applause. The contrast between the roaring rally and the quiet connection they carried made all feel surreal. Eli stayed close to Barron's side, unsure where they were heading, but trusting him in a way that surprised even himself. Barron gently parted a velvet rope cordoning off a side entrance, nodding to a security guard who recognized him instantly. The man gave a silent nod back, letting them through without question. The hallway they entered was quieter, cooler, and lined with framed photographs and echoes of history. "Wait here a sec," Barron said, turning to Eli. "I'll be right back." Eli stood alone, his hands fidgeting nervously in the sleeves of his hoodie. He glanced at the wall's pictures of presidents, dignitaries, and events he'd only seen on TV. And now, here he was, waiting in the backstage of a political rally, invited by someone who could have easily ignored him. Moments later, Barron returned, this time with someone walking beside him. Tall, elegant, composed. Melania Trump. Eli's eyes widened, his mouth parting slightly in disbelief. The First Lady, well, former First Lady, but still, she felt larger than life. Yet, as she approached, there was nothing intimidating in her expression. Her eyes softened when they landed on Eli. "So this is the boy?" she asked, her accent gentle, her voice kind. Eli nodded awkwardly, barely managing to speak. "Hi." Melania knelt slightly to his level, a warm smile playing on her lips. "Barron told me you were brave today." Eli blinked. "Brave?" She nodded. "Yes. It takes courage to speak about how you feel, especially when others are not listening. But Barron listens. And now I do too." Something about the way she said it, so sincere, so calm, made Eli's throat tighten. He looked at Barron, who gave him a quiet nod of encouragement. Melania reached into her purse and pulled out a small pin, a golden American eagle with its wings spread. "When my husband was in office," she said, "we would sometimes give this to children who showed great strength." She gently placed it in Eli's palm. "This is for you." Eli stared at it, unable to form a response. His fingers closed slowly around the pin, as if afraid it would disappear. Melania stood again, turning to Barron. "Your father would be proud," she said, her voice just loud enough for Eli to hear. Barron didn't respond, just gave a small smile, humble and quiet. And for a brief moment, in a corridor lined with legacy and history, a little boy who had started the day feeling invisible stood at the center of something far greater than he could have imagined. Not just because of the people he had met, but because someone had finally made him feel seen. Eli clutched the pin tightly, his fingers curled around it like it was made of glass and gold at once. He didn't quite know how to react, his eyes wide, his breathing shallow. The weight of the moment was starting to settle into his chest, not heavy like sadness, but full, like warmth trying to fit inside a small heart. Melania gently placed a hand on Eli's shoulder and gave it a soft squeeze before excusing herself with the same grace she entered. Barron remained behind, his eyes never leaving Eli's. "Why did you do that?" Eli finally asked, his voice small but steady. Barron shrugged slightly, leaning against the hallway wall. "Because I know what it feels like, to stand in a room full of people and still feel like nobody sees you." Eli looked up at him. "But everyone knows who you are." "That doesn't mean they understand me," Barron replied, his voice low but honest. "And I think that's worse sometimes, when people already think they've got you figured out." The boy nodded slowly, his expression softening into something between understanding and admiration. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't looking up to someone because of their name or their fame. He was looking up because he saw someone who had chosen to care. A distant voice called out Barron's name. It was an aide, waving for him to head back to the main stage area. The next segment of the event was about to begin. Barron turned to Eli. "You want to come with me?" Eli hesitated. "Like, on stage?" Barron chuckled. "No, not on stage. Just behind it. There's snacks." Eli let out a tiny laugh, and for the first time all day, it wasn't forced or cautious. It was real. He nodded quickly, following Barron down the hall. They passed more framed photos, presidents with world leaders, first ladies at humanitarian events, and walked through a narrow hallway lit by warm sconces. The deeper they went, the more the noise from the rally faded into a comforting hum. In a small side room, a few campaign volunteers were gathered around a table filled with water bottles, granola bars, and catering trays. Barron handed Eli a cookie and plopped down in a chair with casual ease. "You hungry?" he asked. Eli nodded, sitting across from him. "I didn't eat lunch." Barron tossed him a juice box. "Well, that's a crime." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two boys from impossibly different worlds, finding common ground over sugar and quiet. Eli, who'd come in from the cold with nothing more than a hope to be seen, and Barron, who spent most of his life seen but rarely understood. As the minutes passed, the quiet between them became more than stillness. It became trust. And while the world outside still spun in noise, politics, and cameras, inside that little room, there was only kindness. And for Eli, it was enough to start healing. The hum of the rally returned as footsteps echoed closer to the break room. An aide peeked in and motioned to Barron with a quick nod. His presence was needed again. Barron stood up, brushing crumbs off his hands, then turned to Eli with a soft smile. "Stay here, all right? I'll be back in a few minutes." Eli nodded, gripping the juice box tightly, almost like it was anchoring him to something real. Okay. Barron left, and for the first time, Eli sat alone in a space where he didn't feel out of place. Around him, campaign staff moved in and out, too busy to stare or question why a small boy sat among them with cookie crumbs on his shirt and awe in his eyes. He glanced around at the posters on the wall, slogans about strength, unity, rebuilding. Words he had seen so many times, but never connected with until now. Because it wasn't the slogans or the speeches that made him feel hopeful. It was the unexpected kindness. The moment Barron had seen him, time passed. He didn't know how long. It could have been minutes, could have been an hour. But eventually, Barron returned. His jacket was slightly wrinkled from sitting backstage, his expression calm but serious. "You okay?" he asked. Eli nodded. "Yeah." Barron pulled something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper. He hesitated for a second, then handed it over. "It's from my dad," he said quietly. "I told him about you." He wanted to say something. Eli's hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the letter. It was short, just a few lines written in thick black ink. The handwriting was unmistakably Donald Trump's, but the words weren't bombastic or boastful. They were simple. "Eli, your story touched me. You're not alone. We're going to make sure your family gets the help it needs. Stay strong. You've got more people in your corner than you know. Donald Trump." Eli's eyes welled up. He read the note again and again. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "You don't have to say anything," Barron replied. "But you should know you mattered today. Not just to me, to him, to everyone." For a moment, the room fell into stillness. No campaign noise. No staff shuffling past. Just two boys, one who'd always been overlooked, and one who had learned to look deeper than anyone expected him to. Barron stood up and offered his hand. "Come on," he said with a grin. "There's something I want you to see." Eli reached for it. No hesitation. No fear. Just trust. And as they stepped out into the hallway again, walking side by side, Eli didn't feel small anymore. He felt seen. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he belonged. The hallway behind the stage was quieter than expected, filled only with the muffled sounds of the crowd beyond the curtain. Barron and Eli walked side by side, now no longer strangers, but not quite old friends either. Something in between. Something honest. Eli glanced up at Barron. "You're different than I thought." Barron raised an eyebrow, amused. "Different how? I thought people like you, the ones on TV, wouldn't care about kids like me." Barron stopped walking. "People like me?" He repeated, not with offense but curiosity. Eli looked away. "Famous, rich, protected. You don't have to see what I see." Barron didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, thinking. "You know what's strange?" he said after a pause. "Sometimes I feel the exact same way. That people see me, but don't really see me." Eli blinked, unsure how to respond. "My name walks into rooms before I do," Barron continued, softer now. "But you didn't ask about any of that. You just wanted to sit and be heard." "I'm sorry if I said something wrong," Eli whispered. "No," Barron said quickly. "You said what most people are afraid to say. That takes guts." They stood there for a beat, the silence stretching comfortably between them. Then Barron reached into his jacket and pulled out a pen, a small emblem with a gold eagle and a blue ribbon beneath it. "My father gave this to me when I went to my first rally," Barron said. It was a reminder that no matter how loud the world gets, some things are worth protecting. He handed it to Eli without hesitation. Eli looked down at it, stunned. "I can't take this." "You're not taking it," Barron said. "I'm giving it." "There's a difference." From the other end of the hall, a voice called out one of the campaign staffers, waving for Barron to come back. Barron turned to Eli one last time before heading off. "Stick around, okay? I'm not done with you yet." And with that, he disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Eli holding the pin, more confused and hopeful than ever. Back in the rally hall, the atmosphere was electric. Chants echoed through the space, red, white, and blue lights spinning across the crowd like a wave of energy. But none of that mattered to Eli as he stepped out from behind the curtain, still clutching the pin Barron had given him like it was the most valuable thing he'd ever owned. He didn't expect to be seen again. Not by Barron, not by the crowd. But then it happened. Barron took the stage. He wasn't holding a script, no notes, no teleprompter. Just raw emotion in his eyes as he gripped the microphone. "Before I say anything else," Barron began, his voice steady but filled with something new, something real. "I want to tell you about someone I just met backstage." The room fell into a hush. "His name is Eli. He's not famous. He doesn't come for money. He's not asking for attention. He just needed to be heard." Eli felt his breath catch. All eyes slowly turned toward him as a spotlight swept across the crowd, landing gently on where he stood near the edge of the platform. Barron continued, "And in a world full of noise, fear, and division, he reminded me that the smallest voices often say the most important things." There were murmurs, applause, even a few tears. "He didn't ask for help," Barron said, "but he helped me. He reminded me why I care, why I speak, why I show up." Barron paused, then looked directly at Eli, his words now meant for him alone. "You asked if I ever felt lonely," Barron said, referencing Eli's first timid question. "Sometimes, yeah. But today? Right now, I don't. Because you're here." The crowd erupted. Not just for the words, but for what they represented: connection, humility, humanity. Eli stood frozen, tears welling in his eyes. For the first time in what felt like years, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. Barron stepped down from the stage and crossed the distance between them. No cameras, no handlers. Just two young men who'd found each other in the middle of a chaotic world. And without a word, Barron wrapped Eli in a firm, brotherly hug. That image, two very different lives, meeting in one shared moment, would go viral within hours. But even without the cameras, even if no one had recorded it, the truth would still remain. In a world divided by status, politics, and power, one act of kindness had rewritten everything.